Hi, this is Ken Gidge, and this is The Art of Politics. As you know, this is the only show on the station that has both a Republican and a Democrat. And of course, this upsets Democrats because I have a Republican on, and this upsets Republicans because he has a Democrat on. But today we got a real special guest. Now, David, you're going to introduce our guest, and don't, you know, you better be nice to him.
I'm gonna be nice to him. You better be nice to him.
No.
Oh, all right.
We'll all be nice.
All right. Well, let's.
Okay.
I'm Dave Robbins and Speaker O'Brien. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming, joining us on The Art of Politics.
I wanted to come here to tell you really how upset I was that you guys had this show together.
Well, it's you know we try to have a good time. We try to educate and.
It's a bloodbath. What do you mean
Yeah.
educate? Everybody hates us.
Well,
we can't get anyone to come on. You know, you're the only person who come on this show.
And I'm here to tell you to stop it. It's
yeah,
just,
there we go. Well, you know, I understand that Ken hasn't told me exactly what's going on, but he has a problem he wants to talk with you about. Maybe we should get this right out of the way.
Let's get this. Now, look, we work hard. You know that. We go door to door, and I think we all deserve 3 minutes to speak. And, you know, I mean, this is important to us, because if we go up to the podium and we stand in the well and you only have 9 minutes, I think it is, we can't do that. But we know the reason why you do it is because you can't get the Republicans to shut up and the Democrats to shut up. They just go on and on and on. Correct? Would you agree?
my power, my authority in the House is derivative of the other 399 members. I can't do anything.
Well,
without.
we were thinking.
Where did you find that? Because that's usually behind the podium.
No, we were thinking that you should take something like that. So watch it. It came from a. So you can put that up in your office, and we would like you to remember or bring that down and say, look, you got 3 minutes and no more.
I mean, this looks like it came out of a medieval dig when there was the first attempts at democracy. This didn't work out so well.
That actually came from a circus where they would bang the bell.
Oh, right.
So that's why. So, but we're gonna, this is gonna be on loan for you.
Yeah.
And,
that's great.
We'll bring it up when the session starts.
If you could bring it up Organization Day.
There we go.
Because I want to set the right tone.
All right.
Because if you take it out once, I suspect you won't have to take it out again.
That's hopefully that's true. Hey, could you tell us a little bit about your background and why you're doing what you're doing, what you have done? What brought you to where you are now?
Well, I think like a lot of us, I think probably most of us who are in the House, it started off with a sense of obligation to a community, a sense of obligation to be engaged in the civic life of the community. So I started off on a school board and ran once and didn't win, ran again and did. Pretty much, I think, as we've all experienced in those positions, nonpartisan. And eventually another person on the school board asked me to run. He was, as state representative, he was a state representative, working full-time, couldn't do it. And so I agreed to. I actually took out the Republican Party platform before I agreed. I looked it over and said, well, that makes sense for me. So if I'm going to be partisan, that's certainly expressing the philosophy that I want to go up to Concord with.
How long were you a rep before you got speakership?
Well, I'm completing my third term, so...
so in other words, we came in together.
I came in 2004 because I lost one term. So I came in, elected in 2004.
Well, we have something again in common. We've lost equally to as much as we have won.
It's a good thing to win, obviously, but it's also a good thing to lose because it makes you understand that these positions don't belong to you and that the people at all times have the opportunity to make a choice.
That's a very, very good point.
Yeah, so,
very good point.
And there were wave elections, I imagine, one wave election or another. It certainly took me out, took you out, and it gives you a chance to say, did I do the right thing and why was I up there? And it also gives you a chance to understand that success in politics should never be judged by winning or losing elections, but rather that it should be judged by whether you can answer a question of yourself, have I been doing the right thing? And that may help you win an election. It may help you not win an election as well.
Let me ask you one more question on that subject. How in the world did you have just really basically 2 terms or 3 terms and end up as Speaker? That's question one, and the question A of one would be, how did you end up with such a majority? What happened?
Well, you know, there's wave elections, and certainly elections become nationalized. I think in 2006 they were, which swept a lot of Republicans out, and I think in 2010 the elections were, which had the reverse effect. So that kind of answers your second question. I think it's partly as a result of that, partly as a result of the really hard work we did. We did a lot of recruiting. Leading up to the election in 2010, we really wanted to have a strong large number of people and strong candidates running. And you know, the reason I became Speaker is I think I just found that being in the New Hampshire House was something that I understood very well. I understood how people interacted in that setting. You know, within a couple of months of my first being there under Speaker Doug Scammon, he actually brought me into leadership as a caucus whip. And so there was early exposure to leadership, and then I understood as well how outside groups affect the leadership, the legislature itself. Became very active in the House Republican Alliance, which,
Yep.
you know, in my second term, which would have been the 2010 to 2000, the 2008 to 2010 term, that particular caucus or group became the most influential part of the caucus. We actually controlled more votes than the leadership itself in the Republican caucus. And so it was a natural transition at that point to go into speakership.
And I think people have to understand it's also a lot of politics. They think getting elected is where politics really begins and ends. It really, I found, and I think David is also, really there's a lot more politics once you're in. But you did it very well, and you're there. And I disagree with you on a lot of things. I've always tried to respect you and you know, and where you are, and respect your issue. I think a lot of people do that. But the great problem is that there is so much animosity. When someone heard you were coming on, it was silence from a Democrat, and I think this has got to stop. So we hope this is kind of a beginning, and that's why you've got the.
Right. These are hard issues that are facing us, both in our state and our country, and there's really divergent views on how to address them. And so many of us lose track of the fact that there's good people on either side. We just see things differently. You know, I have been interviewed quite a bit, you know, recently and over the past couple of years. And what I try to emphasize is that as I look across the aisle, figuratively, I don't see bad people. I see people who really care about my neighbors as much as I do, care about my country, my state as much as I do, but they see a different way to get to that shared goal of bringing prosperity and bringing security to people. And you know, I'd characterize it probably differently than you would, but I look at the Democrats and I see them looking at more immediate gains. You know, let's put this program together and let's take care of this immediate problem. Whereas I think Republicans tend to have a philosophy that says, let's look at where we're going in years in the future, and as we put together programs to address problems, is it going to end up causing those problems? If, for example, you put together a program to take an example, to assist young women who have had children outside of marriage, are you going to end up promoting that and as an alternative? And are you going to end up causing more problems in the future? You're going to have more children outside of marriage. And that's just an example. I think we're trying to look at, from a Republican point of view, of where we're going in the future. What does this mean in the future?
Speaking of the Republican point of view, and the Democratic point of view, in this sense, how big is the Republican tent? Do we tend to be more inclusive or exclusive? Do we tend to have litmus tests, or do we tend to be inviting and open to people and say, come on in?
You know, David, we have to mean something. We can't be just a group of people that say we're gathered together for the purposes of being elected. And I think neither party wants to have themselves characterized in that way. And so I think both parties would turn to certain fundamental beliefs. In the Republican Party, I think we are attentive to fiscal responsibility as we understand it. We're attentive to a limited government, thinking that in the end that will make for a stronger society. We're attentive to local government. We like government decisions to be down as close to the people as possible. We're attentive to liberty, which is recognizing that there is a sovereignty of the individual, that there's a place where the government can never be. And indeed, accepting that is because the individual we as individuals have chosen to cede some of our sovereignty to the government for the greater good, but understanding that there's just a place the government can't be. And so gathering around that, there can be there's an expectation that people agree with that, but there can be real divergent responses to particular issues. There can be, a divergent response to right to work, for example, or to gambling, or to many other issues. There's no litmus test in that regard, but there is an expectation that in the fundamentals we all kind of agree, so we can have a discussion with each other.
You brought up right to work, because you and I are on the opposite side of that.
Right.
But I find it quite fascinating. Obviously, it didn't pass, and
it did, Dave.
It did, but there was a governor there who, and then we went through. But it looks like with the Republican governor. Do you think if that comes up, and I'm sure it's going to come up again, right to work, do you believe that the governor will sign on to it, or will sign it into law?
Well, it really depends who the governor is, doesn't it? I mean,
say,
I think a Governor LaMontagne would certainly sign it. I've talked to him about it, and he's been very, very public in his expressions.
You have talked to him about it?
Oh yeah, but I wouldn't have had to because he's been very public in his support of right to work.
Right to work, but what New Hampshire's doing so well, we are doing very well, and the right to work question seems to be going right across the country. But it doesn't seem like there are too many companies up here that are really crying for it.
I sat with Stephen Moore, who is the economics editor in the Wall Street Journal, and I've met with Arthur Laffer and talked to them about right-to-work legislation in New Hampshire. And it resulted in an article, well, actually, maybe it's a little bit too egocentric to say it resulted, but subsequently they wrote an article in which they made the point that New Hampshire's economy would be one of the most dynamic in the country if we had right-to-work legislation passed here. With the fact that we have no broad-based tax on personal income or a sales tax, we would have an economic engine here with right-to-work that would be the strongest in the Northeast for sure. We've seen how this happened. 1 out of every 6 jobs that have been formed in this country have been formed in Indiana since less than a year ago. It became a right-to-work state. If you look at economic studies of Oklahoma, which was the last state before that became a right-to-work state based upon Census Bureau figures, and there's a great economist, Scott Moody, who did this study, you see that there's both organic, internal growth within the state and companies coming into the state. We are doing okay relative to other states. We've gone from when our majority came in to being just below 6%. We're bouncing around between 5.1,
but we're not
5.4.
doing bad with the way that it is.
For
those two states,
for anyone who doesn't have a job, we're doing terrible. As Ronald Reagan said,
of course.
A depression is when you don't have a job and you want it.
Exactly, but the 2 states that you mentioned, what are their economies compared to New Hampshire?
They're getting a lot better. When one out of every 6 jobs in the country is formed in Indiana, when within a week of Governor Mitch Daniels signing right-to-work legislation, Caterpillar announces it's shutting a plant down in Ontario and moving every one of those jobs to Indiana, you're on the right track. You know, we have a problem here in New Hampshire. We are we are the third oldest country, state in the country. Demographically, you know, our young people are leaving. If you compare the 2000 to the 2010 census, we grew slightly, but in the age group of 25 years to 34 years, we went down 15,000. It's because we aren't forming jobs here. Old people tend to be prosperous. You know, we've paid all our bills, our mortgages are paid off. You know, when you get to be my age, you've put the kids through college and everything, and this is a period that, relative to those who are beginning their careers, we look prosperous. But that's not something that we can build on, having a bunch of old people be prosperous.
But once again, I think David's going to ask you some questions about probably our universities. But let's just one thing on right to work. You had a few people in your party were very strong against it, and you got very upset at them.
Are you asking me to agree with
this
that? I don't get upset.
You didn't get upset. Oh, okay, well, that's as far as I'll go with that. We'll move on.
No, I mean, you know, for example, David was a member of the caucus who voted against it, and so you keep on talking, Sometimes the conversation goes in the direction you want, and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not upset at people.
We'll give you some of our tapes. Here's some of the conversations we're having about that.
Well, you know, you're talking about things that lead to economic development, and we've got a constitutional amendment coming up that would make it unconstitutional to have a broad-based tax. Can you speak to that for a minute, and why is that important?
You know, I was talking to the Secretary, or actually somebody on my behalf talked to the Secretary of State. It's going to be question 1 on the ballot in November. And question 1 would prohibit any new income tax on personal income. So it doesn't prevent a tax being formulated on corporate income or business income. It doesn't prevent an extension of the existing tax on personal income, which is the interest and dividend tax. It just says no new tax. What it does is solidify the advantage that we have seen play itself out over several decades now. And I'll give you an example of that. If you look at Maine and New Hampshire right after World War II, we were very similar states. Neither of us had an income tax, sales tax. Demographically, our ethnic mix was about the same. Our manufacturing and business mix was about the same. Maine's per capita income was actually higher than New Hampshire's. And for whatever reasons, and we can discuss the reasons why, but for whatever reason, Maine went one direction when it came to the size of government and the mix of taxes and so forth. And New Hampshire went another direction. Our taxes remain low, our government traditionally small, and Maine adopted a sales tax, adopted an income tax, and so forth. And now if you look at the indicia of economic and social health in comparing between the two states, such things as divorce rate, children raised with their biological parents, graduation rates, immunization rates for children, all of the indicia of economic health, as well as the history of government finances, you find New Hampshire is much better shape. What we're trying to do with that amendment is solidify that advantage, to give people the choice to say, we are going to make sure that we won't have in the future a tax that will take away that strength.
That sounds good on theory, okay? But isn't there moments where a tax must be brought? New products or new industries, et cetera. Everything changes over a period of time. Isn't that just a stop? It's not that I want taxes. I certainly don't. But occasionally it's necessary to get over a few things.
Well, there's something new, then tax it. We're talking about income. Income is not new. The sources of it can be differently derived, but income isn't new. And we, I think, have had demonstrated now, decade after decade, two things. One is, by the experience I just told you, that a choice and the ability to go forward without facing any personal income tax is a real strength of a state. The other is that we've had two demonstrations during that same time period, in the 1970s, I think it was, in New Jersey, and the 1980s in Connecticut, where the argument came forward that we need to reduce the local real estate property tax. And so in both instances, they enacted an income tax. They basically said, you know, the property tax is too high. And what they found in both cases was government spending just took off to the degree that the new revenues came in from income tax. New Jersey now has the highest property taxes, real estate property taxes in the state. Connecticut has the third highest. We've demonstrated that the one argument that can be, I think, credibly made for an income tax is not an argument that by history is shown to be accurate, that somehow we can reduce property taxes through an income tax. All we're going to do is increase government. I have an additional concern, and it's one of the reasons I certainly support this question being on the ballot and the people saying yes to it. And that is that an income tax allows itself to be increased by its very nature, increased sort of incrementally, the sort of the frog in the warming water syndrome there. And we can, because you can just increase it a percentage. We're just going to increase it 1/4% this year. And we've watched that play itself out in Illinois and New York and California to the point that personal income tax there is so onerous that those are economies that aren't vibrant. And so it concerns me, that given the nature of the tax, that it ever become part of the mix of taxes that we have here.
Well, this is going to be interesting, definitely.
What do you think is going to happen to the question? You and I both want to see this pass. I'm not sure whether you do. What do you think? How close do you think it'll be?
I think both sides have yet to get the conversation going. I've seen some surveys, polling surveys, that have indicated that by its very nature, you know, if you just ask the question without there having been much publicity, you're well over a majority. And within striking distance, certainly, of the 2/3 that would be necessary to have it pass. I think it's going to really play out on whether or not one side or the other gets its act together and starts supporting it or opposing it.
I don't think there will be much problem. I think it's going to be a 2/3. I really don't. I think I just gave away how I feel about it.
Yeah, I wish I could be so, you know, sanguine about it, but I don't. I think it's. I'm not sure of that.
Well, it's only 7 weeks until the election, and I don't know about either of you, but I've heard virtually nothing about this either. I would expect to see signs up. I would expect to see advertisements somewhere. I've heard nothing. What's going on? Nobody's really talking about it.
I think we've all been sort of focused in on the gubernatorial races. You know, there have been, on both sides, Democrat and Republican, there's been some really interesting gubernatorial races. Okay. I think we also have a national race, the presidential race, that's really kind of sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I've been involved in conversations with people, and I think there's now an increasing understanding that the question one is going to be there. It's an important question. And I think Ken illustrates, I think, some of the concern we're going to have on both sides of this. I don't think it'll pass unless we get out there and make the argument. I don't think it's a natural win. On the other hand, to the extent some people think it is a natural win, I think they're going to make sure it doesn't by getting their perspective out there.
Well, I can tell you that I have been approached. I'm not going to go into the details of it, and I just said I agree with the speaker, et cetera, and that. So there is, how can I say this? There's money out there for candidates if they will agree on, and that's nothing new. This is just politics. So I think they are working sort of below the radar, and I agree that certainly the presidential election is certainly sucking the air out of everything. Now, you certainly agree with, let's see if I get this, Governor Romney, that 47% of the people are moochers, or was that one of his best remarks? Or
I don't recall him using that word, moochers. I think he made an accurate observation that concerns a lot of us, that difficult to go to folks and say, we want you to concentrate on what's good for our country in the long term, which is that we are populated by individuals who are productive, when they find themselves receiving government benefits, some of which is sorely needed, I'm sure, but it's easy to vote your personal and immediate need. And I think that's the concern that Governor Romney was expressing. I don't think, and I gather he probably doesn't think this as well, that every person who's receiving government benefits is going to vote for President Obama as opposed to Governor Romney. I mean, I think my mother-in-law, who's receiving Social Security, is not a great fan of President Obama at all,
no,
for example.
but
and should be in that 47%. So I don't think I think it's just it's a concern. I mean, I'm trying to remember, there was a French philosopher who liked de Tocqueville, did a tour of America and had commentary as well. And he was basically saying this democracy will only last until a majority discovers that they can use its mechanism to take all they need from a minority. And so it's always a concern. It's an inherent weakness in a democratic representative government if you have people that always vote their immediate needs as opposed to their communities.
But let us remember that Governor Romney declares that the middle class makes $250,000 a year. And the 47% are like your mother-in-law. It's like relatives that I have who have really basically earned it from Medicare or Medicaid if they need it, and also Social Security. Well, that's the 47% that he's talking about also. I mean, I'm not sure if it's meant that way, but it certainly doesn't sound good.
I think he was just describing the headwinds you have when you're talking to folks that are dependent on government payments, and where we all know we need to go in the future is the government spending is unsustainable. We can't. And look, I'm a speaker of a state house. I'm not running for federal office or anything, but so whatever position I have on this doesn't speak to anything other than
yes, but Mr. Speaker, there's only 50 speakers in the United States. Yeah. You're one of 50. You have a voice.
I understand that, but I think we're all concerned that borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar that the federal government is spending in the long run isn't a sustainable way to run government. We're all concerned about a government that is so loath to face its essential budgeting questions that it can't even pass a budget in 3 years. I mean, can you and Dave and I go up to Concord? We were up there this last time. Can you imagine us coming out of this term and saying, oh, by the way, just couldn't get it together to pass a budget, just couldn't do it? I mean, we would deserve, all of us, Democrat, Republican,
we'd be gone.
To be thrown out. We would be gone. We'd deserve it.
We would be absolutely gone.
And so there's some of us that are just sort of appalled as we, contemplate Washington and contemplate what's going on down there, that there's such dysfunction, and the dysfunction is reflecting itself in ways like, borrowing that kind of money or allowing spending to get to the point that it's $16 trillion in debt. I mean, these are existential problems. They challenge our existence.
You really can't blame.
I'm not blaming anyone. But I'm blaming everyone down there.
All right. Well, let's. You got the
a couple of social issues that have come up. We've dealt with in the House same-sex marriage. There have been issues around Planned Parenthood. Can you explain what your position is and why a little bit on both of them?
Well, I want to make it clear as we talk about social issues, because part of the mantra that we hear in opposition to the election of the majority is that we've been only doing social stuff and we haven't been concentrating on what we promised, which is jobs and the economy. We had 50 members of the House Ways and Means Committee, members of the Finance Committee, who worked almost half a year, in some cases 7 days a week, to come up with a very tough budget. Toughly, in its effect, we understand because we've run out of money, but also tough to put together. We had 80 bills passed that in big ways and small reduce business regulations in some very, very important ways. We had 20 bills that reduced taxes and fees. So in terms of where we spent our time on exactly what we said we would, which is putting our fiscal house in order and concentrating on getting jobs for our economy. And it shows up. There's 12,000 more private sector jobs in New Hampshire now than there were when we were elected. Now, clearly, as you know, every member has a right to bring forward any bill that he or she wants and get it to the House floor, get it into committee, out of committee, and the House floor. And there's going to be bills that are very important to good people, such as the bill to return to a traditional definition of marriage, and I'm sure there's other bills. What is great about the New Hampshire legislature is, unlike Congress, and I do meet with the other House speakers every once in a while, and I'll talk to them about how their bodies are run, and some of them are just like Congress. They can go bottle a bill up in committee. We can't do that. So there's going to be bills that come up, and we give them a very respectful debate. Some bills are important to some of us, and not to others. A return to a traditional definition of marriage is an important step that we have to take, I think, at some point, because from my way of thinking, there's no way finally to have fiscal responsibility when the core building block of our society, families, is being redefined in a way that will cause it, in the end, to be weakened. Because it becomes such an amorphous thing. No longer will our tax laws, our inheritance laws, our custody laws be dealing with that entity in the same way. And so that's my concern,
but if
and many members' concern.
If we're providing for more people to form loving relationships and have them sanctioned by the state and provide better support for children that are involved in these relationships, how is it that we're hurting families in the state? How is it that we're not supporting, I mean, we are supporting children.
Where do those relationships begin and end, if not with a heterosexual relationship? What is to stop us from saying that three people cannot participate in the same loving relationship sanctioned by the state that provides support from some children that they manage to bring into it, to the same degree as two men or two women?
Yes, but we're not saying that. We're talking about two people.
But there's no. You have to understand, Ken. There's no boundaries at that point.
Well, the boundaries.
There truly isn't any boundary at that point. This is a hard world to live in, and if people find whether a person of the same sex who brings them comfort and joy, I'm glad for them, and I don't want in any way to impinge upon their ability to do that.
I would like
but that
just,
doesn't mean it's marriage.
No, I want to hold you a little on this. You wish to get the definition of what a marriage is. Are you saying that what this will turn is to take away people in New Hampshire having the ability to get married? As same-sex marriages? Is this where you're headed?
I'm saying marriage always has been recognized as a significantly different relationship than other, perhaps, significant relationships, because it involves, not in all instances, because we don't test people, it'd be absurd to do so, but it results in children. And we understand that there's no other environment that children can be as most successfully raised in than a family involving their biological mother and biological father. And so over time, we have put together a series of laws, tax laws, custody laws, all kinds of different laws that say we recognize the significance of that. We recognize what it does for children that can't be done in other relationships. Biological parents of children, for example, will sacrifice for the children in no way other that we see other adults do. That's an example of how significant that relationship is.
So your answer is...
And so my answer is, if you depart from that that definition that has existed for millenniums and has worked well for society for those thousands and thousands of years, because somehow or another other groupings of individual want the affirmation of the relationship from the state, it's inappropriate. And there's no final definition. You know, there's no reason why. You know, the absurdity when I sat in judiciary last term rather, and the absurdity of this argument that we should go to same-sex marriage, but we certainly should not let two brothers marry each other. You know, so well, why not? You know, what difference does it make?
That's not the
no,
issue.
no.
I don't want to
the reason. No, I'm sure you don't want to go to that.
No,
because the reasons that we have had prohibitions on marriages between people of degrees of consanguinity is because we understand that it's going to result in birth defects, because we understand marriages produce children. We have to watch out for that. That's why we've had those prohibitions. But if you have two same-sex individuals, you know, that doesn't come up.
You know,
but so what we're saying...
We only have an hour, because we could go on with this.
Let's talk education for a second.
This is something that... Because I think everybody agrees with each other, but on a different level.
Well, I'm a libertarian. I really think of myself as being libertarian-based, and so I don't want to get any way involved in someone's relationship with another person, but I don't want them to come to me and say, abandon one of the crucial underpinnings of our society, because I want you to approve of what we're doing, and I want you to use a certain word to approve of it. And you know, the absurdity of it is of doing so can be seen by, you know, well, then why don't you want two brothers to marry each other, or why don't you want three brothers and one sister to marry each other?
That's how the Republicans go about it. They say stuff like this, and I try to catch Dave when he does that. I say, no, don't do that. Let's stay on the issue.
I never do that.
Yeah.
Tell us about
questions on
education. A couple of questions that may mix together. The Republicans in the House have taken heat for, quote unquote, slashing $100 million from the University of New Hampshire.
Where did they get that?
It
wasn't 100 million. It's 45, 45. But,
45.
But go on.
Well, per year, wasn't it? Was that?
No.
No. 45. All right. And the second thing which may tie into this is there was a constitutional amendment which failed to pass by 2/3 in the House to fund education at the local level. What's with education? What's happening? What would you like to see happen?
Well, you've asked me to talk about apples and oranges here, and I really want to talk about them, but you can't talk about them the same way. You can either make an apple pie or
pick an apple.
Right. We came in having made a promise to the voters that we were going to hold ourselves to certain standards when we budgeted. We said we weren't going to raise taxes and fees, and that was important to the voters, and that's one of the reasons we ended up getting a 75% majority, I think, in both houses. We also said that we're going to budget like you do with your family or your small business. We're going to first figure out how much money we have to spend, and then we're not going to spend any more money than that. And I think maybe because some of us, including me, hadn't been in there a long time and didn't think of ourselves as traditional politicians that would look for the opportunity to equivocate, or would think of the fact that I really want to be here another 10 years, and so I better find a reason of not causing too much controversy. So when we countered this deficit, we're going to like raise taxes a little and say, oh, woe is me, I couldn't help it because it was the Democrats' fault, but so we didn't do that. What we said is we're going to first figure out what the revenues are going to be, and we're going to be quite honest about it. We're not going to be overly conservative. We're not going to be optimistic. And parenthetically, we've done a very good job. We're 14 months into the 24-month budget cycle, and we're $1 million off. We've collected about $2.2 billion, and we're about $1 million off. About $1 million more has come in. And so we, as you remember, as both of you remember, we went to the House floor, and we committed ourselves not to spend more money than that. That turned the budgeting process on its head. because we didn't figure out how much we want to spend before we figure out where we're going to get it. We
Yes.
figure out how much we're going to
Yes.
have,
Yes.
and then when we decided.
You were
Now-
criticized for that, too.
well, a lot,
Yeah.
but I think it was keeping our promises. It really was keeping our promises, because I sat there, and you know, and I'll say it now. I came up with this approach, and there was a lot of pushback in my caucus and my leadership against me, saying, "Well, no one's ever done this before." And I said, "No, we're going to do it," and we did it. But the reason I'm going through all this is because we came up with a figure. And then we made another decision. And the decision we made was that we weren't going to put money into the rainy day fund. You know, as a fiscal conservative, I'd like to come out of a budget with what is recommended by most state advisory foundations for state budgeting. They say have about 4 or 5% of your annual expenditures in a rainy day fund. We decided we're not going to do that because we're going to be able to say one thing, and I'll say it right now. We spent all the money. And so to the extent we cut UNH, or the extent we cut this program or that program, what we were doing is making choices to where what were core functions and what we needed to do, you know, for people who are on disability or people whose, you know, lives would be threatened if we didn't continue funding. And then there are other choices we made that we probably would not in a different environment make, like reduce funding to education, but we thought it was appropriate. And we went to the Senate and said, you tell us, you know, this is our cut on it, you know, following the rule, we're not going to spend more money that's going to come in. Tell us what you think. And so that is one of the reasons that cut occurred. Now, I'll tell you something else, and the reason that I thought we could cut more there than in other places is because the inflation in tuition over the last 30 or 40 years has far exceeded the underlying consumer price inflation. You know, I went to school at a public school in Massachusetts, and I started in 1970, and I paid $350 a year. I was on my own at that point, and I could, you know, I was working 40 hours a week. I actually used to work at a hospital warehouse, and I'd get my money to live and money to pay my tuition, and I could do it. And it's because it's $350 a week. I went to talk to the university trustees a little over a year or so ago about the cuts. And I pointed out to them that if you just did a consumer price inflation run on $350, and by the way, I confirmed that was about a normal tuition back there at a public university, that it would be $2,200 now, $2,300. UNH is $16,000. We have allowed, through overspending of government resources in universities in general, and certainly public universities, we have allowed them to become inefficient. They don't provide a good product for their customers, which is their students, and they need to face economic realities. It's $16,000, not $2,200, $2,300 a year.
Are you saying, though, that universities should be almost privatized in state universities?
I'm saying that specifically UNH ought to remember what its mission is, and its mission was to be judged by how it would take a Bill O'Brien 40 years after I went to school and help me out getting a 4-year education. You know, I came from a family of 7. It was understood we had to pay our own way to college. I couldn't come out of that environment now at $16,000 a year and hope, without assuming great amount of debt, to get an education at UNH. Moreover, the education they're giving is of questionable value. You know, when I go around the state and I talk to business people, they talk about a number of different things that they need. They need some tax relief. They need certainly a lot of regulatory relief. Healthcare costs is very expensive. They need educated workers. Not one of them has said to me, you know, I need some more liberal arts majors to come in here. You know, I'm just devoid of liberal arts majors. And we're sending our kids out with, is it the highest? I think I read it was the highest per capita debt of any students in the country, with degrees that are of really questionable value. If we're going to restore cuts, you know, David and Ken, I want us to put money into the community colleges. They do a great job.
No,
5,000 or 6,000 a year. They do a great job.
That is a good point, because my uncle owned a large manufacturing, a shop where they created things. And he said, I can't get people to get their hands dirty.
Right.
So the community colleges are so important right now. But to say that the universities are graduating liberal arts students, they usually go on and do something. But I hear what you're saying. Now, the university has said that they will freeze tuition for 2 years if they can get back some of their funding. Is that going to happen?
No, I'll sit down with them. I think they've come up with an election year strategy at this point. And if they had that approach, they should have talked to us back when we were doing budgeting, not when they're trying to influence elections. But we'll get into budgeting in January, and we'll talk to them again.
Tobacco tax. You talked about us being, well, after 14 months, within $1 million, which is probably 0.001%.
Well, something
like
yes.
that. And the tobacco tax during 2012, we lost about $12 million. We're $12 million less than we thought we were going to take in, and we're taking in less than we had budgeted for.
Well, you're going to point out, in order to provide the context for this, that all of what we call the sin taxes are down.
All right. Well, I was going to let you
beer is
point
down
that out.
and so forth. So, clearly what's happening is that with the increase in gas prices, doubled since President Obama took over, as a matter of fact, more than doubled since President Obama took over.
Very well done. I love it when he says that. I
Republicans.
love it when he groans like
This
that.
is like I get beat up. Two Republicans.
And so it means that fewer out-of-state residents are coming because, there's whether it's consciously made or just intuitively made. Certainly someone living in Massachusetts, Maine, or Vermont, when they think of, am I going to drive some distance to get to New Hampshire, is going to say, well, gee, I could certainly, I love the fact that there's going to be cheaper beer there or cheaper cigarettes and all, but I'm going to use up a lot of gas to do it.
But aren't we at a place where we lowered the tax, and then the cigarette wholesalers raised their price to retailers by the same amount? And what does that say about the
that
concept
says
of
that they
lowering
raise their
taxes?
price that time of year, the same amount that time of year every year. They do it every year.
Okay. But did they ever lower it, or?
Do they lower? No, they have a product that has a great deal of price elasticity. They're dealing with, I guess, an addicted group of people.
All right.
By
But
different
would
definition.
Would it be fair to say that we anticipated one outcome, which would be that lead to lower prices, which would lead to increased volume? That didn't happen for any number of reasons. Does that call into question the whole concept of, if we lower taxes on something, the revenue from that thing will increase? Does that at least bring that into question?
Is that one of your mistakes? Is that
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Clearly, there's a number of things that factor into whether or not reducing taxation on certain economic activity is going to increase that activity. I mean, you could lower the tax on widgets, figuring that people will buy more widgets if they're cheaper, and then you find out that the fad has moved on from widgets. I mean, here there's a number of different factors that go into play. We had an economic study that told us a number of different things. One was that New Hampshire was the only state in the Northeast in which the wholesale sales of tobacco products was going down. Everywhere else they were going up. So we knew we were losing sales to surrounding states. We had a study that said for every $1 in tobacco purchases by out-of-state residents in New Hampshire, people coming into New Hampshire, $8.56 is spent by those same individuals for other goods and services. We knew that there had been 5 increases in 6 years, 4 of which were state increases. And there was a study that indicated that all things being equal, and they haven't remade all things being equal, you will get more revenue if you reduce the last tax because you've gone past the curve of the pricing curve. And so we took a very measured approach to this. We said, let us then take that step of reducing it for this budget only. It'll go back up unless we show that we're able to gain as much revenue. And I think that's a reasonable thing to do because this is the third largest source of state funding. Now, we can talk about how bad smoking is, and I don't think we want anyone to smoke. But as bad as a person being addicted to smoking is a state addicted to the revenue from smoking. And we need that revenue, so we have to protect our revenue source. So I think it was a reasonable step to take. And just as we estimated certain amount of money coming in from one source or another, whether it's the business enterprise tax, the business profits tax, the rooms and meals tax, or the tobacco tax, or any other number of sources, we mixed them all together. Some have come in less, some have come in more. The tobacco tax, some months have actually been up. I think if we can get gas prices down, and who knows where they're going to be, we might recover our revenue there. But overall, the estimates were good. We haven't, for example, not funded any particular activity because of the reduction in the tobacco tax, because we assumed that the amount of money that would come in would be the same. That assumption hasn't been bearing out, at least the first part of half of the budget, but just as we assumed we'd get less and some, we've got more, it's evening out.
Well, that sounds really good, but we still
Thank
have
you.
lost $20 million.
No, we haven't lost anything.
Well,
We'll see at the end of the, first of all, it's not 20. I mean, first it's 12, now it's 20.
well, though it's 2 years, so
I'm-
it's 20-something million, isn't it?
Well, we haven't lost, no.
A million here, a million there.
After-
Soon you're talking about real
after-
money.
You've been speaker, and you've certainly made mistakes. Not that I
Certainly.
excuse.
Other than,
You know,
other than
I
other
was
than
hoping
becoming
you-
speaker.
I was hoping you were going to let me finish that
what
sentence.
mistakes?
You were going to. Obviously, you have made mistakes. I'm not talking as a Democrat. I'm just saying, what would you change? I mean, you must have, in your way of learning to be a speaker. I mean, I don't think there's a handbook for this. You either have to come up in the ranks. I know when you first got up there, several people who should have assisted you, without mentioning names, should have been of help, and they weren't. But of all the things you've done as a speaker, can you point to one thing that you would do differently?
One thing I'd do differently, I would seat the people in the House differently. I had talked to the minority leader about interspersing Republicans and Democrats throughout the House floor. And I thought that would produce greater collegiality, and it probably would have, but she was really, I can't say insistent, that's not right. She was really adamant that she really wanted her caucus sitting by herself, and I thought, given her concern, that it would have been really heavy-handed not to acquiesce to it.
So you
and
said,
I think it would have been better. It had been done in the past. I mean, it's not. We always think that things are done the way we've seen them when we're there.
Oh, yeah.
It used to be in the past that people were sprinkled around. I've really considered this issue going into if I'm elected by the folks in my district, and if I do become speaker again, of perhaps not sprinkling people around, not kind of mixing it up in a haphazard way, but maybe trying to sit people with their committees. And
good.
Because
Good.
I remember being a backbencher, and one of my most important affiliations was with my committee, whether it start off election law, judiciary, and I think maybe we can sort of build up a little bit of cross aisle, because here there wouldn't be aisles,
No,
but some cross party affiliations, because
it's tough.
if you're on transportation, I notice the folks over there, they care about transportation issues
Exactly.
and how to do a good job there, not as if the road is going to be blue or red.
Well, if you think you've had a difficult time, out of 297 Republicans and 103 Democrats, we've had a tough time.
But
how you said you would change it and try to go across, or you treat everyone differently. Give me an idea. I know you said that sprinkle the Republicans and the Democrats together. Is there an attitude that you think you would want to change? Not necessarily a personal attitude, but an attitude as in your totality, how you would treat people differently?
No, I think again, I'd really welcome people being oriented to their committees, and that would not only, I think, sort of break down this artificial barrier that is created when you sit them in different parts of the house, but would in addition strengthen the committee system. Now, I understand the committee system became challenged somewhat this term because we had so many freshman members between both caucuses. And so you have people there who aren't...
That's a good point.
Yeah, who aren't understanding that these are folks who have really worked hard. You know, I'm sitting in Judiciary and I'm watching Health and Human Services Committee come up with a recommendation, and I'm not respectful of the fact that these folks have really worked on this legislation, heard all the testimony, and we should be somewhat deferential to their conclusions. You don't have to agree, but, you know, and so I think it might well strengthen that. And so, you know, in terms of where I'm trying to go, and I think what could produce a better house is that, you know, there's always going to be individuals there who find their identity within the House and their relevance in debates by being disruptive. And they're just not going to go away.
That's true.
And
That's
it's
true.
just going to happen.
That's true.
And so, you know, it's always going to look messy. Democracy looks messy, Ken.
Yes.
You know, people can
Yes.
call into the House.
Yes.
I mean, call in. They can look on video, go online and watch it. And you're going to see people wandering around, and, you know, you're going to see some debates and voices raised and everything. And we're not automatons. You know, people get emotional. These are important issues, and they're
We
tough
do?
issues.
People
you do.
get emotional?
You know, and
Yeah.
maybe it didn't appear that way, but, you know, as I would be challenged, and I think by...
You've been challenged.
Yeah, but as I'd be
Yeah.
challenged by the Democrats and their
Or
leaders,
Republicans.
or Republicans, but I would understand. The point I was making is I remember being in a real minority, you know, back in 2008, and I realized how frustrating it can be. You know, I used to sit there all evening before debate, writing up my speeches and all that, knowing that I was right and that this was a very persuasive speech, and you'd give it and you'd think, I got my point across, and you'd watch it all be lost, and that can be very frustrating.
Wait,
I really
did you
tried
have
to be
3
tolerant.
minutes? Did they give you 3 minutes?
Oh, hush up there.
Well, I mean, you know, we're coming
No,
close to
come
the
on.
hour, and don't
Well, let me-
forget,
can I-
that
can
we,
I-
Well,
we
yeah,
won't have 3 minutes.
You understand, the only time we had 3-minute limitation is when the House voted for it.
Yes.
Because I can't do that otherwise. I can do nothing that the House doesn't allow me to do.
Yes, but you listen, you have a little influence, I would say.
Right.
We're almost at time. Just one more quick question. Legislative Committee on the Liquor Commission. How is that going? What do you think might happen? What's your hope and intent?
Yeah. Well, my hope is that we fully understand systemically, not on an individual level. I really don't, at this point, care who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. I really want to know systemically what are the issues, what are the problems over there, and what are the solutions. And I really want them to think out of the box. As I put into the memorandum setting up the committee, I want you to understand what's going on, but think about if we were to deal with this issue in the beginning. If we're sitting here, you know, and we've repealed prohibition, for example, and we're going to distribute distilled beverages in New Hampshire, what's the best way to go about it? I mean, all of us have some ideas. You know, I think this 3-commissioner approach certainly doesn't work now for an agency because, you know, you have no final person responsible. I think that a commission, if it's going to be a state agency, continue that way rather than be privatized, needs more legislative and governor and council oversight. You know, so I think there's some solutions, but I really want to leave to them. I don't want to dictate to them.
And let's make this really clear. We kind of talked, we thought we wouldn't bring this up because your office did call and ask if I would be on this.
Absolutely.
And I said I would be on it. So I want everybody to realize that I'm on this commission.
Yeah.
And you know what has happened so far, and I wouldn't talk about what I think is going to happen.
Yeah,
But
in many ways, Ken, I can talk a little bit more freely than you because you are part of this committee and you're going to come up with a report and recommendation. I know you want to hear everything before you do that. And so, you know, I can stand back and say, here's what I've learned so far and here's what I think is going on. But what is most important to me is that that committee does its work, It has great members on it, comes up with recommendations, and then as we go back into session, we look at those recommendations, some of which will be reflected in bills filed, and say, great, let's take this learning, let's take this hard work and clean up some of the problems over there. I mean, there's just so much we've heard. It's clear that there are some problems over there.
But also, it is a $600 million a year business, and I guess I can say that because that's factual. And there are some mistakes, but overall, it's not going too bad. I'm sure there are changes that will take place, but I cut in on that because we're over. We were only going to be here for 45 minutes.
Well, maybe we should be like the Puritan minister and take the hourglass and just turn it over again and go for another hour.
No, well,
No, okay.
Well, I'd love to do that, but I want to get a 3-minute glass.
Oh, get out of here.
You know, I
here.
want my 3. But anyway, I am an artist, and I think we've talked about art, and so we have talked about how difficult your job has been, and I think the words were herding cats.
Feral cats.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, we're going to give you this, and this is called, here's the speaker right here. This is herding fish.
Okay.
So it's a 3D, and it's relatively new. And we have talked about creative people up here in New Hampshire, and I'm just one of many. But we thought that you might like this. It's called herding fish.
Ken, have you signed that?
Oh, yeah, I have done it. Yeah.
Okay, so on behalf of the House of Representatives, I accept this.
Okay.
Thank you. Very, very nicely done, because of course this is worth more than $25.
I know it
is
is.
it? So,
I know it
it's
is.
not. No. I put the price on it.
it was, what'd you say, $9?
$8.
$8. All right.
$9.
All right.
All right, well, Mr.
Not even
Speaker.
$8.95?
That's a deal.
You can pay for it if you want to.
No, on behalf of the House, I will accept it.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, thank you very
Thank
much
you,
for
David.
coming. This has been
Thanks,
wonderful.
Ken. This
Thank
is
you,
great.
and I can see that you should get more in here, not necessarily with us, because some of the things that you said has cleared it up for me and possibly some people out there. You are one of 50. I wish you were a Democrat, but you're not. I try to have respected where you're coming from, and I'm going to continue doing that. And I have had people who are criticizing me for having you on, and I don't like that. That's why David and I have blood fly around most of the time. But I want to thank you very much, and would you please say you will come back?
Oh, of course I will.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well,
I
that's
enjoyed
it.
it. Thank
Well,
you.
All right, we'll say
Thank you.
goodbye. Thank you very much.